My name is Eitan Chatayat and welcome to I'm That podcast, where I get to talk to some pretty incredible people. Some are friends and colleagues, some are clients, and some are people I haven't even met yet. On I'm That, we'll hear from them about who they are, what they do and why, stuff they love or hate, mistakes they've made, victories they've had. They're all known for something, but by the time we're through, the hope is they'll have revealed some things we didn't know about them. Our talk may be deep, profound, funny, who knows really. One thing for sure, it'll be interesting and honest. So if you're up for that, thank you for joining me on I'm That, and here we go. Ella Kenan is an Israeli digital marketing professional and content creator specializing in travel. She runs a well-known travel blog for Israelis, but since October 7th, Ella has been actively engaged online in the information war, focusing on the Israel Gaza conflict and the broader scope of psyops against Israel involving Iran, Russia, Qatar, and other bad actors. As Ella sees it, these misinformation and disinformation efforts pose a significant threat to life in the West as we all know it. She sees Israel serving as the first domino in a much larger global picture, and she fights the good fight every day for Israel and her allies. She's amassed hundreds of millions of views, and in December 2021, Ella, alongside other figures, was given the honor of lighting a torch at Israel's National Independence Day ceremony by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. The honorees at the ceremony came from various fields where they represented Israel in the world by excelling in their professional arena, alongside activity for Israel's image in the media and on social networks. I'm so happy and honored to have her here today on I'm That. We've become fast friends and colleagues in this fight. Ella Kenan, it's really nice to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be on this podcast.
You know, so many people tried to introduce us, and then finally at the NAS
Daily Summit.
Yeah, it was Shelly from iAngel. She finally introduced us, and we were just like, okay, let's just get together. And we've gotten together a few times, and I'm so happy that you're here. Listen, the purpose of this podcast is, of course, to talk about what it is that you're doing, and you're doing so much, but it's also to get to know you. And that's what I really want my audience to understand who you are, where you come from, to understand what you're doing, but more importantly, I think, is why you're doing it, because you have such passion and you've committed yourself. One other thing that I didn't warn you about. You know that the podcast is called I'm That. And so I like to start the podcast with a question. The question is this: Ella Kenan, can you please complete this sentence? I'm that.
Wow. I'm that maybe Jew that forgot.
I'm that Jew that forgot.
That forgot that I was a Jew. I forgot my Jewish identity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to tell. You have to tell me about that.
Look, I'm born and raised in Israel. My family, on my maternal grandparents' side, they've been here for centuries. Samechtet, for all the white colonizer arguments. Yeah. Of course, I grew up Jewish, but secular, which is great. But I never thought about my Jewish identity. It wasn't something that was in my sphere day to day. And, you know, I'm well-traveled. I lived abroad. I traveled around the world, been to almost 80 countries. And it's never something that...
80 countries?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And it was never something that, like, I carried with me. There wasn't any inner dialogue about that. And I think that after October 7th, I realized that I do have a lot to say about my Jewish identity. And my Jewish identity is important for me. And even it was probably clear to me, but now I understand it's not obvious at all. I need to put it out there. It's my obligation.
You know, you're Israeli. And I think that a lot of Israelis, it's a common theme with Israelis. Like, they don't really think of themselves really as, like, October 7th changed so much. It's like before, like, I'm Israeli. It's kind of like being Jewish is kind of the package. I don't talk about the Jewish, I talk about the Israeli. But now I've been speaking to a lot of Israelis like you, and of course I'm Israeli too, that are putting their Jewishness kind of
I'm a Jew.
You're a Jew.
I'm a Jew.
Okay, so you come from digital marketing.
Yes.
You have been honored by Israel in a big way. Can you tell us with Yosef Haddad what that was so that people understand?
Anate Buzulich.
Nate Buzz.
Yeah, Nate Buzz. A torchbearer, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And on Independence Day,
Mm-hmm.
I lit up a torch. That does make sense in English.
You lit a torch.
Yeah, I lit a torch. On Independence Day, I was honored by the State of Israel for outstanding contribution to the realm of influence and Israel advocacy during this war.
That's a huge honor. And I've been following your work ever since I heard about it. And it's one of the big reasons that I wanted you on the podcast is to talk about what it is that you're doing. Why is it so important? And also to understand where it is that you're coming from. Now, your professional background is as I said, digital marketing. Can you just give us just a little bit of context? And then I'd love to talk about what happened on October 7th that made you do what you're doing now. But where do you come from professionally? And where do you live? And what's your story?
Yeah, so as I said, just plain, born and raised Israeli. I work in digital marketing. And for the past decade, I also have a travel blog, which before October 7th was pretty renowned. I had exposure also outside of Israel. About 40% of my followers were non-Israelis. So that was pretty developed. And I worked with local tourism boards around the world about the branding of their destinations on social media, especially for younger crowds. And also traveled myself. I worked with not only tourism boards, but airlines and hotel chains and et cetera, et cetera. And this is my biggest passion, travel. I don't necessarily also travel to places that are comfortable or because I had the collaboration with the tourism board, but places that are interesting to me, like, I don't know, Cook Islands.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about this place?
Yes, I have. Well, I've traveled around quite a bit as well, but yes, I have.
Yes, I know you've traveled. Makes sense. So it's not a place that I think most people will never hear about that place. Or Vanuatu, or I don't know, Suriname, or I don't know.
Off the beaten track.
Yes. I also like Paris and New York. It's not that I don't, but I'm interested in these places. And so I had a great life before October 7th as an Israeli. Israel is not perfect. It has a lot of problems. On one hand, you feel like you're first world, you're 30th in the world in GDP per capita, and you're leading in so many areas and life is really good. But on the other hand, there's terror and wars. I grew up as a kid in the second Intifada, when they sang on campuses, it's like long live the revolution. Intifada revolution, long live the Intifada. People don't know what that means. It means exploding buses with people on them and exploding them into parts and exploding yourself in the process. That's what terrorists did. And it achieved nothing. It didn't free Palestine because in order to free Palestine, there is really little to do. It's very simple. It starts with stop killing Jews.
Yeah.
And so this is a very complex way of living. So you're not Western, like all Western people, but you're not for World War at all. So you're always between these identities. And I was well traveled. I lived abroad with my family. I had a digital marketing company in Israel. So I think that was very stable and nice and things that I don't think I will go back to what I was, even on a consciousness level. Like, I can't unsee what I've seen. So even when the war ends, I think that being an active part of the Jewish people is something that I plan on doing. So it's not necessarily this specific war.
So I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. And also you have such an important role to play because you understand digital. You've amassed an audience, with your
With
your
travel.
work prior. Yeah, with your work prior to October 7th. So October 7th happens and you decide, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to use my platform. What are you doing? I mean, what's your mission with what you're doing? You said right now that you're going to kind of be there for the Jewish people. But what does that mean?
I think that part of our agenda, I think it's misunderstood around the world. And I think that we talk a lot to our echo chamber. Now, if your main goal is to talk to the echo chamber, then that's great. But if your main goal is to get to the people that aren't necessarily coming from the echo chamber of the Jewish Israeli communities, then I think that we fail in that sense in general. And I focus on the digital sphere. I'm not claiming, to change everything on any other realm, whether it's on campus, physical on campuses or debates or things of that sort. And what I'm trying to convey is a message which is completely true about the fact that it's not only our problem. We're just the first domino. And what we see now in the world, the instability you see in so many regions in the past 2.5 years and even more, it's a whole part of a bigger thing that is against the West and Western civilization. And I think that a lot of people in the West are either indifferent or think that it's not going to reach them at any point. And that we in the West, if I include myself in this civilization, which I am, that's what I'm doing, we think that what was will continue to be. And I think that we belong in a generation then that's what reality, showed us. That we were born and grew up and living our lives more or less in some comfortable environment that doesn't really, shift dramatically. If I would tell that to somebody who is, 95-year-old that lived in North America, or better said, Europe or other places around the world during World War II, they know that everything can change and your reality can crumble in front of your face and life can change forever. And I'm not talking only about Jews.
I think that you're not talking at all about Jews.
At all. And I'm claiming that I'm not prophet of I don't want to panic anyone. I think there's a lot to do. I think that we're very strong and I'm very optimistic. But I think that we should understand the premise of where we are.
So I'm going to elaborate on that and we can talk about how you feel about this. But first of all, we're completely aligned there. I've been for around 15 years advocating for the Jewish people, but it's not just the Jewish people, it's Jewish values. And Jewish values are Christian values. The Judeo-Christian values are what has shaped the modern world. And I don't know if you've read General MacArthur's book, Battleground, but if you haven't, I highly recommend anyone does. Mm-hmm. But what he did was after he served with Trump, and I'm not a big Trump fan, but when he served with Trump, he left and he wrote a book. And the book could have been a tale of serving with Trump and what that was like. But instead, what he did was he wrote a book which highlights the state of the world that we're in. And he based it on 4 active countries: Iran, China, North Korea, and I'm missing one. Russia, thank you. And what he was basically saying in the book is, what you're seeing happen in the world today is not an accident. There are governing bodies, and this is not conspiracy theory stuff. It's like there are governing bodies who have made informed decisions with vision and with money and action to try to change the world power structure. If America represents democracy and freedom and Western values, then these other powers that be are trying to undermine them. So I really agree with what you're saying, because it's not to panic anyone. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's something that's really happening.
And by the way, some of these actors are very forthcoming.
They're very open about it.
They're very open
Sure.
about it. So, for example, Iran is very open about its strategy and its next steps.
Yes, but the thing is, what they're doing, and this is what, and this is part of the reason why so many people in the West are not seeing it, is because these very countries are putting a lot of money into propaganda, which
In the West.
in the West,
The
which
West is
eventually
very penetrable
yes, and
because of democracy.
yes, and then what happens is these people don't see what they're saying. They're seeing, they don't see their objective. They see what they're saying. They're getting in through the back door and they're taking advantage of democracy, and it's very strategic. So, what can we do about it?
I think so. Let's start with the premise. I think that even, a lot of Americans I talk to don't necessarily understand the bigger picture. Oh, by the way, also most Israelis, yeah? And we are in the midst of a war.
We're learning it now.
Exactly. So the premise is that the new world order was set in the end of World War II in 1945. And it was very obvious that the US is the biggest economy, biggest superpower around the world. And it became more or less the world's policeman in a sense. And of course, the Cold War started, in which the USSR, it's not lost, like it collapsed. So it left the US as the winner, as the one that really sets the agenda around the world, since communism failed miserably, like it always does.
Mm-hmm.
And now we see that the US is weaker in recent decades. It didn't start with Biden or with Trump. And you see that in both sides of American societies, both political sides. If we're talking about America First people on the Republican Party, then that is interesting. They want to isolate America from the world. They say, why are we aiding other countries when we have our own problems and we want the money to stay inside of the US? We don't want to be part of what the US is doing around the world. But I think that you just need to understand that means that you're not the top dog anymore. If you want to be the top dog, biggest economy, biggest superpower, and you want to be number one, then that has implications, and that, you have responsibility. You can't stay the top dog and then isolate in your basement. It doesn't work like that. And on the other side, we see on the more progressive side of the Democratic Party, and even if we go to the fringe of it, which the fringe unfortunately is growing, then they're talking about, we don't want to be part of international and other countries' wars because we are so evil. In our essence, America is the biggest evil on earth. And we are so bad, and everything that we're doing fails miserably. And because of us, all of us are suffering around the world. And America is such a bad place.
It's guilt.
Yes. So it's
white guilt.
And, I talked about it yesterday. I had a space on Twitter, and I said that this is amazing because, the white guilt thing is like, everything we're seeing now around the world is because of all the bad things white people did. Now, first of all, I'm not white, yeah? So it's not like I'm making a case for myself. But you can look at the photos. but white people did do a lot of things that are extremely evil and problematic. But also, Africans sold their enemies to slavery, to the slave trade. Mm-hmm. And Arabs, there's still slavery in Arab countries to this day.
Not only slavery, the Arabians in the past, they colonized the entire Middle East. No one knows that.
Exactly. Like the biggest colonizers there are. Israel, in its, in the shiniest day of the week, is the size of New Jersey. That doesn't look like an imperialist, superpower. And, we're talking about, the Japanese, the things they did in China in the 30s. So I think we can conclude that Homo sapiens is a shitty race. Okay? In general, I don't think it's necessarily specifically white people. And I think that even when white people do that with white guilt, even that is, very self-centered as usual. It's like, oh, we're the problem for everything. It's like me again. It's very narcissistic in a sense.
So what do we do?
I think that we start to understand that this is going to change our lives forever. And I think this is so now we know that America is not sure it wants to be the top dog anymore. And when it's not the top dog anymore, then they don't take an active stance about things that happen in the world. We see the war in Ukraine, and I know that the US sends billions in aid to Ukraine, but it didn't start in 2022. In 2014.
Yeah, with Obama.
There's the Russian just took the Crimea Peninsula. And then in 2008, the Russians just went into 2 regions in Georgia, not the state in the US, but Georgia, the country in Asia, and just took 2 regions. And nobody did anything.
That's the thing. When America decides it's not going to take a leadership role, then a vacuum opens up. And who's going to fill in the vacuum? And you have, again,
China, Russia, and I want to say Iran because it's important to understand how they perceive themselves. There's a famous saying in Chinese saying that there isn't any place for 2 suns in the sky. And there isn't a place for 2 superpowers on Earth. And I think that's how they see themselves. There's only one. And they have, this long-term plan of being the biggest superpower. And they have a lot of resentment towards the West. If you think about the opium wars in the late 19th century, there's a lot of resentment towards the West, or maybe inferiority complex in a sense. When we're talking about Russia, you don't need to be a genius when you listen to Putin talking with Tucker Carlson in his interview, talking about how the USSR was, he dwells on these memories. It's like, that's what he wants. He wants to make the USSR great again. And that's a place where people died of hunger and stood in lines for hours to get a piece of bread.
So you're saying that people are not aware and that the first step is awareness.
Exactly.
So what are you doing?
So just to show you exactly what is happening. And I think we have this amazing example from just this morning. This morning, Israel time, which is late night in the US.
Yeah, and by the way, it's September 5th. I'm not sure when the podcast is coming out, probably in a couple of weeks, but just so that people know. Yeah, exactly. September 5th.
And I just talked with you before when we met that a right-wing influencer called Lauren Chen that has over a consecutive number of over 1 million followers on social media. She was arrested. There's an indictment filed against her in the US for getting millions of dollars from Russia for propaganda. And the propaganda includes talking about the fact that Ukraine is to blame for the war and that we should support Russia. Talking about the fact that Israel is evil and, to make the Americans not want to support Israel anymore. And also talk about the fact that Jews in the US are foreign agents and they're not proud Americans at all. And this is really funny because I just show you one of her last tweets about Israel was that, Jews are foreign agents in the US. And girl, you're the foreign agent. And this is something that is happening because they made over 2,000 videos that went viral and got a consecutive number of tens, if not hundreds of millions of views. And these things are not just happening. This is not spontaneous. We see influencers on social media. You don't necessarily need to know who they are. I'm going to mention them really briefly. One is Syrian girl, which is she's Syrian. She escaped from Syria in the civil war in 2011 to Australia. She lives in Perth, and she is one of the most anti-Semitic and anti-Western voices on social media. Again, millions of followers, and she was seen in China, in Shanghai, and in Moscow at the same time with another anti-Western influencer called Jackson Hinkle, which calls himself a MAGA communist, which doesn't make any sense, right? But he's an agent of chaos. It doesn't need to make sense. He's like, I'm a communist, but I'm also America first. And it doesn't really, go together. And he says that the Jews did 9/11, that we should support the Houthis, even though their slogan is death to America. And they are all filmed in Moscow together on tanks, meeting with officials. Guys, they don't necessarily write these things because it's spontaneous. There is a plan to all of that. They're not even trying to hide it.
So your role is to counter their narrative.
Of course.
So let's get back to you. So you're a digital marketing professional, a successful blogger of travels. You have an audience. You've woken up since October 7th. You've woken up to your Jewish identity. All of this, the world is in chaos. It's been going on for quite a while, kind of like behind the scenes, even though for people who are more aware, you've seen it coming. There's this perfect storm of shit. And then there's Kenan. What's Kenan doing?
So first of all, I'm not only giving information, which again is not based on conspiracies. It's the documented history and truth that we forgot. This is the post-truth era. I want to make truth great again. That's what I want to do. And the second thing is I want people to understand the process that is being made. And I'm using my platforms for doing that. But I also create communities in order to get that message across to places and people that won't necessarily follow me or see my content on social media in order to make it smart. And one of the reasons I came here, apart of the fact that I really admire a lot of the things that you do, I think they're super creative and there's a lot of things that we have in common, is that I want to reach new audiences and say, we are in danger and it doesn't look like that. But do you remember Hitler? No, you remember. I don't think we remember that, but we know that Hitler, he took the Sudeten land and then he did the Anschluss. He took the Austria and nobody did anything after the Munich Agreement because they didn't want war. And in the West, we can't stand it when it's not comfortable. We just want our comfortable lives. So we're willing to compromise on our long-term security, values.
It's like, make it go
freedom.
away. Someone
Exactly.
make it go away.
Because we don't want to die for things. We don't want to fight for things because we think that everyone are like us, that they think that war is stupid and has no sense. And I agree. My preferred option is peace. But that's not what's on the table. And not all cultures are alike.
But what the enemies of the West are doing is they're making it appear to the West that it's not.
The problem is the West. They're
exactly.
gaslighting us.
Exactly. And I don't think that, I think a lot of people are waking up. And I think that that's a good thing. I mean, that's the silver lining of October 7th, if you can even call it a silver lining.
But not enough non-Jews.
Not enough.
And
no,
they are our allies.
Yes. And I think that the silver lining, there's a silver lining for Jews, which is the growth of the Jewish community. But there is a silver lining for the world. And that is that people need to wake up to what this is all about. Because what you're starting to do is you're starting to trace back where, for example, Hamas comes from, what their ideology is, who are they being sponsored by, what is the interest of those who are sponsoring them, for example, Iran, who is aligned with Iran in terms of a country or global player.
And why October 7th?
And why October 7th. And all of these things are starting to fall into place, but we're really at the beginning. Like some people ask, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is like, are we at the brink of a third world war, or has the third world war started? And I think that it started and that we're in it right now. But it's a different kind of world war.
In high school, when we were being taught about World War II, at least in Israel, then it never started only with the Jews in 1939. It didn't even start in 1933 when Hitler rose to power in Germany.
Hitler Youth was around for 7 years before the Second World War. They were training their kids
and
for
Mein
7
Kampf
years.
Since 1925.
Sure.
But not only that, we learn about the war in Ethiopia with the Italians. And then we learn about what the Japanese did in Manchuria and China. And then, there was a world instability. Everybody were crossing the line and just seeing what the international community would do. And it did nothing. And, there was even pressure. And, you can see photos of demonstrations from like 1939 and 1940 in the US of that we don't want to be part of this war. We're after the Great War. We shouldn't go into that. I even seen a poster about like, maybe we should listen to Hitler. Maybe Hitler is not that bad.
Hitler, first of all, he was a fascist. And of course, there was a fascist movement in Europe. There's a fascist movement in England. There was a fascist movement. People were demonstrating for Hitler in America.
Yes, it did.
People don't know that.
People don't know that. Right. There is documentation of that. And it only started when, of course, after Pearl Harbor. But so these things were years in the making before, when they describe World War II as like, September 1st, 1939 till 1945, in Europe, it ended on May 8th and then in August in Japan. But it didn't really, we're not looking at it wrong. So now we're in the midst of things. And what I imagine is that in 20, 30 years from now, they're going to look at all these events that led to something. Now, for sure, I prefer my comfortable life. I prefer traveling around the world careless. I prefer thriving and thinking about things that can promote humanity rather than taking it backwards. But again, I also understand that not all cultures are alike and people don't have the same processes that I have. Not because mine is better, it's just different. And I think that the West really grew up on the notion that, we all think the same in a sense. We all have this logic. We all have this, common sense about things. And it's not true.
Because it's more, like you said before, it's more comfortable and convenient and easy to think like that. I honestly think that when I'm in the States, for me, it's supermarkets. I go to supermarkets in the States and they're fucking just warehouses. And here in Israel, you have they're not that massive. But the interesting thing for me is when I go to a supermarket, Ella, it's just like there's so many distractions from consumerism that it's so comfortable, it's so convenient. You're so in your own little world of conveniences that it becomes very easy for people who want to take that away because ideologically they don't believe in the West, consumerism. They can take advantage of the average person because the average person is so unaware and so distracted by the comfort of their life. And what to me the biggest challenge is how do we get those people who are living, and rightfully so, convenient, comfortable lives because they want to live happy lives. How do we get them to wake up to an imminent danger, to shake them out of their it's kind of like the Matrix,
It's true. And you talked about convenience, and I really like that because I think that is also, there's a role of identity that plays in the sense of like a void in meaning. They're like people living, they have no, like we have
purpose.
Yes, you have no purpose. You have everything, but you have no purpose. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that we need world wars in order to have purpose in life. No, as I said, my preferred option is peace and thriving, okay? But since I am in accordance with reality, then I think that it's maybe the first thing that is practical is to understand that we're very, I think we say, sorry, it's not my mother's tongue, susceptible.
Mm-hmm. You're doing fine.
I'm doing fine. Yeah.
Better than fine.
We're very susceptible to things that we see on social media. So I think a conversation about critical thinking, how to identify fake news, or even being, how we react to that. So even if we see things and we don't know what is our stance about it, even if it's popular, maybe we shouldn't share that. Maybe we shouldn't like that. Maybe because we need to have better critical thinking about what are the interests and who are the forces that are trying to steer that. We need to understand that us as democracies, and I'm sitting here in a liberal democracy, we have a lot of strengths. And that's why people immigrate to the West. The smartest Chinese in the world are in the US. The smartest Russians in the world are in the US and Israel. And I think that is a really good marker. If, they hate the West so much, but if people are fleeing only towards one place,
something's up.
Something's up. And I think that is also our weakness. Because because we think that everybody are like us, then we accept everyone, and we also don't have boundaries. We don't have limits, and everything can be said on social media. So now we know that, after there was the hearings against Biden's TikTok in the US, that all the data that they have on users is transferred. They have to, by Chinese law, to the CCP, the Chinese Communist
That's
Communist
exactly
Party.
what General MacArthur writes in his book. And this book was written years ago.
Amazing.
There is a very active...
They want you to talk about your gender all day. Not that gender doesn't matter. I'm just saying that that's what they want you to talk about it. What gender are you today, in order to distract you from things that are much more basic. And that's,
by the way, what you're saying is highly offensive.
Very offensive.
Highly offensive.
Guys, first of all, I'm Israeli. I'm not politically correct. I'm blunt. I know that I will be canceled, whatever.
No, you won't be, because...
But I don't really care about being canceled. I'm not right-wing. I'm not left-wing. I'm a liberal, not liberal in maybe an American sense, but I am pro-democracy and liberalism and human rights. I'm pro-LGBT. I'm pro-women's rights, men's rights, everybody's rights. I am in that realm, but I'm not an idiot.
There you go. Again, highly offensive, because what you're actually saying, and I think that we need to talk about this, and I have this conversation with a couple of close friends of mine who are not Jewish, who live in America. I don't call them idiots because they're not idiots, but they have this... You can't see what's happening. And I think what you're trying to do with your work, and I want to get to the work, and we can go in as much depth as you like, is you're trying to expose people to the truth. There are a lot of people trying to do that. Now, where our work is different, and we know that it's different, is I'm trying to get the Jewish people to understand that the Jewish people need to speak up about the fact that they're Jewish and their Jewish values and their place in the world and how we determine our narrative and nobody else does, which I think is very critical. And that's what I'm doing. But what you're doing in it, and of course...
It's the next step.
Right. And in addition to doing what I'm doing, I also talk fact. What you're doing is you're in an information war. And of course, you speak about Jewish pride as well and how important that is. But really what I see you as doing, and you're taking a leadership role.
I ask questions.
Yes, but people don't know who you are. My audience doesn't know who you are. And I think that we need to start talking about what you're doing, because I want them to, I want people to follow you, and we'll talk about where to follow you.
Yeah.
And you have influence. And the work that you're doing is strategic. And I think that what you're trying to do is you, in your own way, are trying to inform people of the truth and how not knowing that truth is damaging to them. And you're trying to do that in a way that you're not calling them idiots, but what you're saying is like, wake up, wake up. Everyone needs to wake up now, because the things that you love and the things that are dear to you, equality, women's rights, trans rights, gay rights, freedom of speech, all the things that are celebrated are actually being hijacked from you, and you don't even know it.
What was the name of this town? I think it was in Minnesota. The Democratic supporters, a lot of them were LGBT. They supported the Muslim candidates, candidate for the elections, like local elections. And then once they were elected, they banned LGBT flags.
Sure.
So, guys, That's going to happen.
Yes.
Now, I want to differentiate between Muslims and Islamists. Political Islam is a danger, and I'm saying something that is grave, is a danger just as the Nazis, okay? Ideology is super dangerous to everyone, but by the way, mostly to Muslims themselves. And Muslims, they are a variety. And a lot of Muslims are not Islamists. And some of them I collaborate on a daily basis.
Sure.
And,
Me too.
Yeah, and I work with them, not talking day to day. I'm talking about this specific topic, that Islamism, political Islam, Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, is a danger to our world. And it's amazing to see friends and colleagues from the UAE, from Bahrain, saying in our countries, in our Muslim countries, the Muslim Brotherhood is banned. And you guys in the West, you think that it's diversity and you celebrate that. Guys, this is not diversity. Some diversity is a lot of things, but the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam is not part of what we call diversity, because once it gains power, it makes sure that none of us will ever be the same.
So and I want to go back to what you said about the similarities between Nazism and the similarity between, I call it radical Islam, but the similarity is this. It's the Nazis were about being the supreme race. It doesn't give space for anyone else. Political Islam, or radical Islam, as I like to call it, Islamification, is the same thing. It needs to be the supreme religion.
They want a caliphate. A caliphate is just something like the Third Reich. They wanted a Third Reich that will control over the world, right? That's the same goal as a caliphate. And as I said, and it's important to know, the first victims of it are Muslims. Second ones are minorities in the Middle East, where Islam is prevalent, that are non-Muslim, like Druze, Yazidis, Kurds.
Let's go back to what you were saying before. What you were saying before was this, and this is important because this is the connection. You ask a 95-year-old back in the day, who was living back in the day, the world was attacked, infiltrated by a supremacist ideology back in the day. And it got into power silently, quietly, but it was there.
Because it was uncomfortable to go to war.
It was, right. But then eventually they did. You had 6 million Jews that died, but you had tens of millions of people around the world that died because of a world war to defeat this supremacist ideology.
And also Germans, everyday Germans. Everyday French,
yes,
everyday
and then what
Polish.
happened was we got comfortable, the world got comfortable, and here we are again. Now you have a new ideology that is a supremacist ideology that has been rising in power through Iran, because I think
even it should be noted, Iran is Shia Muslim and the Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni. But on the specific topic of
Islam,
they are collaborating together. Now you ask yourself, why is China and Russia are on this? Well, not because they're pro-Muslim, not at all. If you see what China is doing to its Muslim population.
The Uyghurs.
Also in Russia, it's not like they're very pro-Muslim, but they have an interest of making the West weak in order to become superpowers. So on this specific topic, it's better for them that Iran and its underlings will create chaos in the West, because that will make the West weak. And once the West is weak, they can gain more power. They're hungry. The West is not hungry anymore. It's tired. And they are very hungry. So this is where we stand today.
They being, who's hungry?
China, Russia, North Korea.
I want to make the important point now, because everything that you're saying is kind of like being tied together. The people in Europe in the Second World War, before the Second World War, they couldn't have imagined this takeover in Europe.
The Jews couldn't even imagine.
You think about what Germany did is the Germans invaded Poland. They took over Holland. They took over
France, Belgium,
Austria, They were going for England. They were allies in those Italy. They were allies in the Far East. Now, what I want to say,
out Greece.
What I want to say is this, because it highlights the point that you're trying to make, which is, do you think those motherfuckers in Europe could have foreseen? Do you think that they could have imagined that there would be a takeover? No. And I want to bring it to today now, to the average person today now. In America, you cannot imagine it happening, but it can happen. And unless the world wakes up to the facts on the ground that you're trying to put out there, which is what you're doing, unless we start educating and making it a priority, then what's going to happen is this will rise in power. And eventually, as you said, these very people will take away the rights that the people in this country, in the West, in America, cherish so much right under their noses, just like Hitler did.
And exactly. And you know what? I think that maybe we can tap into a few of my campaigns that are ongoing on social media.
Tell me.
That are talking about it. Look, of course, I'm pro-Israel. I'm not from the UN. I'm Israeli. Of course, I support the West. And I think that what we see in encampments and pro-Palestine, how do you call it, marches around the world.
Mobs, I like
the mobs, them. Yeah. It's not about Palestine.
No.
And you know, one of my campaigns, it was never about Palestine. Because if you go to an Anne Frank monument and you say free Gaza, then you're saying my problem is with the Jews, right? Now, they're always saying, no, we're not against Jews. We're only against Zionists. So if you're only against Zionists, why are Jews being attacked just for being Jews around the world?
Stop. People say that a lot. But I want people to stop and think about what you just said. Say that again. Anne Frank is a Jew. What interest does it serve to deface, demonize, attack someone who is Jewish in the Second World War who was killed? It's got nothing to do with Israel.
Mm-hmm. She wasn't even alive when Israel was
So what's it got to do with?
Because it was never about Palestine.
Okay, but what does that mean?
It means that the problem is the Jews. And that's their main problem, and that's their main aim.
And what do the Jews represent?
The Jews represent the West. The Jews represent Western culture. And the Jews represent Jerusalem. Jerusalem and Athens are the cradle of Judeo-Christian values. This is the cradle of Western civilization. Again, guys, I'm not a believer. I'm a secular person. I'm ethnically a Jew, but I'm not a practicing Jew. And I'm saying to you, what is very obvious to us is not obvious at all. We are under attack, and Jews are just the first domino. And that happens every day. Jews and things that represent Judaism are being attacked. But then on the same time, they're saying, well, our problem is not with the Jews. We love the Jews. Our problem is Zionists. But what are Zionists? First of all, 95% of Jews are Zionists. And second of all, Zionism is just Jews living in their ancestral land. And that's like Japanese living in their ancestral land and Italians living in their ancestral land.
And to make it very clear to those people who are not Jewish and not Israeli, if you believe that the Jewish state has a right to exist, if you believe, for example, in a very tricky subject right now, which is the two-state solution, if you believe in two states, a Palestine for the Palestinians and Israel
for the Jews,
then you're a Zionist.
Then you're a Zionist. And not only that,
but they would not have you believe that you're a Zionist, because what the enemies of the Jews are trying to do, they're trying to create a false narrative that Zionism is what they say it is: evil, apartheid, colonialist, genocide, all of that shit, and not what we say it is and what we know it is and what we define it as.
They took over our narrative,
right,
which is documented all around the web. It's not like, we never talked about it. We already, the information is out there, but we need to talk about it more. And, that you said about like Israel's right to exist. That's what propaganda did. It made a conversation about whether Israel should exist or not. I think it's not even a conversation I'm willing to have, because, Pakistan was declared in 1947. Israel was declared in 1948. In Pakistan, they rape women and children all the time. And they are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes against humanity in Pakistan to this day. Rights for LGBTQ is not even something that exists. Exactly.
Pakistan.
Women's right is not even something that exists. Human rights in general, freedom of speech. There are so many bad things that Pakistan is doing, but nobody talks. And Pakistan is just an example, right? It's not specifically about them, but nobody's asking whether Pakistan has a right to exist or not. So Israel, which is set on the ancestral homeland of the Jews, where Jews, and hear it out, live continuously for about 3,000 years that we can prove in archaeology. Continuously for 3,000 years, we need to have a discussion of whether we need to exist or not. And 80 years ago, there were quotas in American universities for Jews, and they couldn't go into some country clubs because they weren't considered white, right? They weren't WASPs. They weren't white. They were a minority. And then in the same time in Europe, they were led to gas chambers because they weren't considered white. They weren't considered Europeans. I have photos from the 1930s in Norway, in Germany, in Poland with people carrying signs saying, "Go back to Palestine, Jews." So everybody knew where the Jews came from. They came from this region called Palestine, which was named by the Romans.
Yeah, nothing to do with Palestinian Arabs.
Exactly. My great-grandmother was a Palestinian because it's a name of a region. Like Tyrol in Austria is the name of a region. The people who live in it are Tyroleans, but it's not a country. It's a region in Austria. So this is the same thing. So 80 years ago, we were exterminated because we weren't white. And now we are getting, labeled as white colonizers. It's like Schrödinger's cat. I can't be white and non-white at the same time.
It's very easy for us because we are Jewish and we feel the threat. What can we do, Ella, because it's not easy to show people who are just justifiably and understandably living their lives in Idaho, in Chicago, in Wisconsin, in wherever they are, they're leading comfortable lives. What can we do to spread the truth? Because just because something is louder and triggers you, it doesn't mean that it's true. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that truth can be pretty boring.
Let's make truth great again. That's what I want to do. So that means that I have a responsibility, whether I'm in Wisconsin or, I don't know, in Köln, in Germany, to be more knowledgeable of what is happening around me. And I need to ask more questions.
But I have to challenge you in that because...
Challenge me.
I mean, it's a play on a tagline, a very successful tagline, everything. But to me, there are people on the opposing side of what we consider truth, okay, that are saying the same thing. They're like, that is their truth. How do we get people to do the real...
Who is committing the crime in Western countries? I'm not saying, of course, there are Jews that are criminals. I'm not saying we're people and we have bad people and we have good people.
Yeah, all of us have good people and bad people.
Yeah, of course. But where are the problems? I'm asking, who is the ones that blowing up airplanes? Who are the ones that cause war everywhere they go, whether it's in Bangladesh against the Hindus, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Russia.
Well, that's the thing. You say that clearly it's, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but like you're saying, clearly we can find that out and it's obvious. But the people on the opposing side, honestly, are saying it's a Zionist agenda. It's yes, but this is
but we're such a small country.
It doesn't matter.
You're not imperialistic at all.
But it doesn't matter.
French and English and Americans.
No,
oh, okay.
I'm challenging. I'm challenging you because I think it's an important thing to. And I'm not disagreeing with you.
I know. You wanted to challenge me.
I want to challenge you because someone listening can be like,
so
okay,
what is the Zionist
Zionists
claim?
Have an influence, and to me, that is a lie. I know that is a lie because I know how many people we are. I know how much money we have. I know that we have
enemies. If we control the media, why are we losing the media battle?
Exactly. So that's one example.
If we are controlling the world, why are we the most persecuted minority in the US? In the sense that the biggest attacks based on ethnicity are against Jews year after year.
So I'm asking you again, because it's a very important question, and I don't think that we've figured it out yet. There is the truth, which requires studying. It requires, not being lazy. It requires activeness, being active, and it requires critical thinking, meaning you don't just accept. The problem is the world that we live in today, and not only the world that we live in today, the world that we lived in, like in the Second World War, people accepted. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to challenge people to look at the facts. But my question is, and I don't know that you have the answer because I don't have the answer, how do we get people who accept a truth, which is really a falsehood, to understand the truth?
Okay, so we use alliances. So we create alliances with people of influence or people that don't have influence, but maybe will have influence in the future, that are on the same page. And they are already, they know what is going on. And we say, we are allies and we want to work together in order to make this a better world. And it's true that now, tomorrow morning, we're not, maybe you in Michigan and me in Israel, we have different things that we want to achieve. That's true. And it's not necessarily the same danger, but it is the same danger on a bigger scale. And we can work together in order to make truth great again. And I think, look at this axis of evil. They are working together. Iran is supplying arms for Russia. North Korea helped Hamas. Iran supplies Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. North Korea is in collaboration with Russia. We see another visit of Putin in North Korea. They are very on the same page in terms of working together as allies. What I'm suggesting is an alliance, a true alliance, a civil alliance, not the ones of politicians and leaders, but one when we work together with a sense of community and taking care of each other and the future of humanity. And I think that gives purpose. And I think purpose gives a lot of happiness in life. And happiness is not that everything is good. Happiness is just, for me, staying optimistic throughout everything that happens in life and being content. And I think that there's a lot of health in that. And unfortunately, we are in this mess. So let's find purpose in working together. So for me, this is communities and allies that I'm looking all the time to share content with, to amplify our voices on social media as we work together and make truth great again. That's all I want. And, I've read these surveys about young Americans and young Brits that most of them say that they won't go to fight for their country if there's a war open on them. And again, as I said, war is the shittiest option. But if that happens, then you rise up and you defend your family and you defend your community and you defend your people. And I think that is noble. It's a noble cause. And I think these surveys show me that we lost this nobility, that we don't take care of each other anymore.
You know what I think?
And by the way, not in Israel. Gen Z Israel branch is amazing.
Yeah, it's we live a different reality.
Best people.
So what I think is, and I've been saying this for years, is we've gotten too lazy, meaning we're too comfortable at the world. I'm talking about, we kind of have it. We have our freedom. We have equality. Things aren't perfect, but I've got everything. It's like a kid.
Of course, things are not perfect.
If you spoil a kid long enough, then the kid's just like, it's just not. I've got
no motivation.
Yeah, I'm not. And the problem is, as you said before, there are people on the other side that they want what the kid has. They want that power. They want that comfort. They want that convenience.
And they look at the world as it's a zero-sum game. And they don't see things like maybe we see, of like we can all have it.
Right.
You know, they see it as a zero-sum game. And this is a big problem. A lot of people in the West don't understand it, that a lot of, like, for example, Islamists, they see this as a zero-sum game. You can't have it, like, we can't have it all together. It's either you or me. And that's an important thing to note.
Yeah, it's supremacy. And America, sure, every country has supremacists. I mean, you have the
And
KKK
racists.
and racists. We all have
We
that.
all have that in Israel.
But America stands for something different, or it should stand for different. And it's falling into the trap. And this is the main issue to me that I see that you're fighting is if you don't appreciate what you have and you just have it and you're not willing to protect it and you're not willing to fight for it, that's a very, very big problem. And there is an active movement out there which is hell-bent on making sure that this population of Westerners that don't want to go, I'm not saying don't want to go to war, I'm saying don't want to go to war to protect what it is that they have that actually makes the world a better place, as opposed to aligning with values that don't make the world a better place. If you don't protect what you have, then you're going to lose it. And I think that's what you're trying to do with information. I know that we don't have a lot of time, but I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you. I'm going to ask you to be brief. Did you meet Elon Musk?
Yes, I met with
All right,
Elon Musk.
tell me about that quickly. What was that like?
He was actually very nice. It was actually very nice. So I was in a meeting with him when he visited Israel in the aftermath of October 7th, which the aftermath of the massacre, the war itself didn't end, and we still have hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas, ISIS. And I came to talk with him about anti-Semitism and also information war, specifically on our side here in Israel. And it was funny. I didn't know he was coming to Israel. It was a last minute thing. But about, I think, 10 days prior, we started a campaign on Twitter on his account, Let My People Note, which there's a feature in Twitter on Twitter X, called Community Notes, which really is a key thing it's a key feature when you fight fake news, because it allows you to add a note, exactly, and your sources to that. And not only that, it also gets the creator demonetized for that tweet. So I really like that idea.
Consequences.
Exactly. Actions, consequences is not something that, cause and result. Like, these things are not very prevalent, as I thought. And
well, it's a value that you need to protect. When there is something bad that happens, there needs to be consequences, and people don't want that friction. They don't want that. It's inconvenient. It's not comfortable to have consequences.
Exactly.
Let's lose them. Okay.
And it wasn't open in Israel, and we've seen that people are lying about us, spreading fake news bluntly. Things that could be, fact-checked on Google very easily, but most people won't do that on X, and we are just, we have nothing, we can't defend ourselves.
But you like what Elon Musk is doing? He's a controversial figure.
He's a controversial figure. I think that the community notes is an amazing feature that should be adopted to other social media platforms. But I think that freedom of speech does have a limit. And no, we don't need to accept everything. And community notes doesn't need to be the solution to everything. And that's maybe where I don't agree with him. But what the thing is that in order to open this feature in Israel, we started this campaign on his comments, on his tweets of like, let my people note, Elon. And we made it viral with like all the people together liked that comment and made it the first comment. And then after about 4 days, his chief of product on X and Elon himself, they commented on our campaign saying, okay, guys, we'll open it in Israel for you. And they did in a few days. And the first thing that, it's not the first thing, but when I talked with him, I said to him, I want to thank you for that. And he said, the Israelis are so funny. They had this like, let my people know campaign. It's like, no, he didn't say campaign. It's like, they said like, let my people know on my comments. And it was funny.
That was me. He was saying, yeah, that was me.
It wasn't only me, we worked together here, but yeah.
So 2 more questions. One is, you're interviewed all the time. People ask you a lot of questions. You you speak publicly. What's a question, and take your time, what's a question that no one has asked you before that you wish they had?
Wow. I need to think about it.
You
Maybe if I'm afraid.
If you're afraid. Are you afraid?
I want to believe that I'm not that interesting. That's what I tell myself.
Wait a second. I didn't understand. You want to believe
that? Okay. Look, when I get online hate, that doesn't bother me at all. Like I don't know why, but I don't care. On the contrary, it even brings me more traction. Kim Kardashian said that, she became a big star only when she had hate following. So it's not a bad thing. But on a more maybe physical level or, on like cybersecurity level, yeah. But again, I don't think I'm that interesting. But I was walking in New York. I was in Manhattan a few months ago, and I was walking down the street, and somebody identified me. And guys, I'm living in Israel, and I know that most of my followers, for example, on X and LinkedIn, are not Israelis. But I also don't put a lot of photos of myself. Like I'm not trying to hide myself, but it's not something that I don't post photos of mine every week or something like that, or even each month. But you can see how I look, and somebody stopped me on the street, and like, my instinct was like, he's going to yell at me or something. And no, he said like, oh man, I'm following you, right? You're Ella Travels.
Yeah, nice.
I was like, yeah. I was like, oh, I love what you're doing. And when I was at JFK waiting for my flight back to Tel Aviv, I was eating in a restaurant. And then when I asked for the bill, they said that it was already being paid.
Oh, wow.
And somebody else paid for that. And they said that like, I'm a good person or something like that. And I didn't, and I told them who was that. And they said, well, they're left. It was a man and a woman.
No, I'm so happy to hear that, because the work that you're doing, and look, you're not like one of those influencers.
Thank you for the Caesar salad.
Yeah, thanks for the Caesar salad. No, the work that you're doing it's not like you're visible like Michael Rappaport.
No.
But you're doing such important work. And
I use communities, allies, other creators.
No, of hundreds of thousands of people. So there was one more question, and we'll make it really fast.
Okay.
Firstly, let's make sure that people know how to follow you. And it'll be in your bio, so people can look at the page. But like, what's the best way to follow you?
On X, it's Ella Travels Love. Mm-hmm. And on the rest of the platforms, it's Ella Travels World. Mm-hmm. And on LinkedIn, it's Ella Kenan, Kenan. And say hi.
Yes, you should. Last question. Social media. Without offending anyone that you don't name, because I'm putting you on the spot, who are 2 or 3 people that you feel are an absolute must to follow, that you follow right now? And take a second.
So I think that the biggest, most important place on the internet today is, unfortunately, Twitter, X. It's not the biggest one, but I think world leaders, people that are opinion leaders and their aides and the people around them and their teams, they are all on Twitter, X. So I will recommend people there, but there are great people in other platforms. I think Brianna Wu, she is a Democrat woman, pro-liberal values that used to be very progressive and made a change, and she has woken up to that. And
Brianna Wu.
Yeah, and she writes these, she depicts it much better than I do, because I'm not that good in English like her. She's American. And the second one is a person called Drew Pavlou.
Drew?
Yeah, Drew Pavlou. And he's an Australian. Mm-hmm. He writes about this axis of China, Russia, Iran, and its proxies all the time. By the way, there was a conspiracy in Australia that was exposed by I think it was Homeland Security, about like propaganda, Chinese propaganda. And they found that they were trying to aim him as well, because what he writes about China. So this guy...
That's a reason to follow him.
Yes, this guy is pro-Israeli, pro-Taiwan, pro-Ukraine, pro-US, pro-Western values. He understands, he knows. And Brianna, she knows. And these guys are not Jewish. They I would never know who they are. The odds of us ever meeting or writing about about stuff in general that could be mutual, it is zero. And then I start, and these are figures that are interesting for me because they are not, I see mostly Jews. Mm-hmm. Or even Americans that are maybe on the more Republican side. I'm talking about moderate Republicans.
So I think first of all, I'm going to follow him. Drew Pavlou, it's DREWPAVLOU. And he says, I support liberal democracy and oppose fascism, communism, and jihadism, anti-totalitarian left. I'll follow him as well. Ella, I know that we have to stop, but you and I are in touch. I suggest everyone follows you. And just thanks for coming in and being on I'm That. I really appreciate it.
And guys, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not following Eitan, then that's a big problem.
Thanks, Ella. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you for joining me on I'm That. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I hope you'll join me for our next guest. In the meantime, definitely hit subscribe, whether you're on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, or any other platform. And if you can, leave a comment, give it a like, and tell your friends. That would be brilliant. Stay tuned for the next show, and see you soon.